Okie dokie. Hi everybody. Welcome to I think week 5 of the Tufts Capstone project for spring 2025. So I've put a couple of things on the agenda for this week, but if there's anything else you want to talk about as well, let's talk about that. Those are just things that um I knew were going on. But I want to make sure this is a time that is helpful for you to have like a sync check-in with us about anything you want to talk about. So first thing I put was just kind of wrapping up initial interviews. I know you were doing that. So I wanted to see how those were, how you're feeling about the deliverable around that for next week for Linda.
Yeah, so I think we conducted 7 interviews in total. As of right now, it's all internal participants. We actually had 2 this morning. But we have one more today that's external. Um, and then one more internal tomorrow. So in total, we will be having around 8. We want to have like a little bit more of the external participants because all we have is internal. But as of right now, we are trying to make like an affinity map of like all of the points and insights we got from each participant. And in terms of the deliverable, we asked Linda for like an extension to kind of incorporate as much insights as possible. So we will be getting that in for her today, with just as much as we have right now. And for next week, we will be doing the persona and um, journey mapping. And hopefully by then we will have like more external participants so that the results are kind of like, um, yeah.
Cool. And the spreadsheet of people that Gina shared with you, who are potential external participants, I'm guessing that the one you've got scheduled for tomorrow, that's maybe from that sheet. Um,
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah, so far we only have 3 people on the spreadsheet, and then 2 of them are part of like one-person teams. So we figured it'd be um, that's like more of an edge case. So we want to try to talk to people who are on larger teams.
How many external users? So do you want to meet with more than just the one that you're going to meet with today
Definitely, yeah, yeah.
for this round of interviews or for this round?
For this round, just so like what we learned isn't very skewed to GitLab. Yeah, we were wondering if you could message Kate, I believe,
Mhm.
about if we could get
Yeah.
more participants on the spreadsheet.
Yeah. Let me figure out how to do that. I think we need to send out the survey. Um, yeah, just being transparent. The way that we do it is that the Kate will send out an email to some people who are subscribed to doing research with us, and she does that in waves. So she sent out that first wave already, and now we could have her send out another wave to get some more participants, because I haven't seen anything else on my side come in that would work well with your profile that you're looking for. So I'll talk to her.
Thank you.
When would the last date of your availability to meet, would that change? Because I think right now it's Friday.
I think
Yeah,
we can extend it to the end of next week since that's
Okay.
before our spring break.
Okay. All right. That seems doable. So I'll update you on Slack.
Thank you.
And the only other thing I had put on there was I wanted to check in on what your plans are for now through spring break, because I know that was kind of a milestone you were setting for yourself. How are you feeling about that? It seems like kind of just wrapping up all of this initial interview is your plan, or
Yeah, we want to wrap up all like the insights from the interview and then start kind of like narrowing down on our scope and probably start like ideation as well. So I think that like the um like persona journey mapping will definitely help us to kind of like narrow down into like which area we want to focus on, and use that to kind of start the ideation process. I don't think we'll get to like the actual wireframing before spring break, but we definitely plan to have that like right after.
Cool. Uh, besides checking in with Kate about like kind of putting more people in the funnel for you for external, um, is there anything else that we can help you with in that in the meantime? I think I would be very interested in kind of taking a look at your initial results from that and giving you feedback on it if you'd like to share those. But anything else that
Yeah, definitely we'll get that. We'll share that with you once we finalize like the discovery research readout, and then also once we have the affinity mapping like all together. I think for now we only have like a couple from like our first interviews and not from like today or yesterday. So once we have like most of it done, then we'll like send it over.
Dasha, you've got a couple of things.
I do. This just popped up. With the review, I'd love to take a look at it as well, but I hope it's okay that I will not be the first to give you feedback, just because I have a different lens, and obviously we have wonderful UX designers on the call who will be able to give you that feedback, I think, much better than I can. But I'd still love to take a look and maybe share that with you after. And then more of, do we need to do another push for participants? I think it sounds like we don't need anything internal, but just external. So I think that answers my question. And then I did talk to Dylan Bernardi, is an engineer in my team, and he's happy to help do either part of the final capstone presentation that you all do, or do more of like a one-on-one with you all. It is 7 a.m. is a little early for him because he's also on PST as me. So if we want to do it at a different time before that, I think he's happy to do it as well. We'll just need to solidify a time.
And that's the member of your team who you said is also a professor.
Yeah. He's
Cool.
yeah.
Oh, I think I interviewed him like yesterday.
Yay! Okay. I
Oh.
was like, I'm hoping that he actually signed up. And then he's like, all
Yeah.
right, let me see what the critique is. Okay, yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. I think um we can definitely find a time like later to meet like one-on-one with him, especially with like the technical feasibility of our designs and like constraints and stuff. And then yeah, we can work on finding that.
Okay, nice. And just to kind of give everybody heads up, he won't be able to give us, I think, the feedback around like somebody from Plan would, right? So like an engineer from Plan would be able to give us something much more concrete. But this would be a completely external lens, since Dylan's background is very much heavily in my area of editor extensions and IDEs, plus a lot of machine learning operations. So just keep that in mind. And if we want to reach out to anybody internal on the plan team, we can also do that.
Yeah, I have a close rapport with the plan team. So if you all want to get in touch with them, I can do that. We haven't done anything sync, I don't think, with Dasha. If you, I'm sorry, with Danica. If you all talk to her, then I didn't know about it. But I think she's interested as well in speaking with you all. So it might be a good opportunity at this point in your process as well, if you've got kind of some like early drafts of analysis of interviews to share with her to get her feedback, I think could be really valuable. But also, Dasha, circling back around to the point of your feedback on all of this, I actually think it's very valuable to get feedback from someone who's got more of a product lens on this, because that's the consumer of this content. So we can kind of give sort of like a peer who's further down the road perspective on it, but you can say like, okay, if I were actually the PM receiving this, here's my feedback. So I think that's very valuable for them to get.
All right, that's good to know. I think it's more of please orient me as to where in the process. I think I'm happy to do it now, or more of like in the next step when you do actually synthesize it and maybe do some more affinity mapping. Like, happy to take a look and just see like, hey, this is how I would interpret some of these results. I think the one thing to keep in mind, because this just happens often, is don't take my word or don't take my view as like the view that you should take, right? It's just feedback from a product as your consumer, as Chad said, but don't let it derail you from maybe research areas or interview areas that you're kind of like, oh, I actually want to lean more into this.
I have like a question I'm kind of curious about. Like, so in real life, in your workflow, like when you guys propose a new feature, like how many teams or departments are actually involved in the whole process?
I think it depends a lot, but usually I think it's sort of a group that owns a feature set is most likely to be the one who is like originating that and moving forward with it. Sometimes a designer from a different area might have an idea that they bring to a group and say, hey, I put together some designs for this. Do you want to do this? There are a lot of things that require collaboration just because there are kind of parts of I think this is probably extrapolatable. I think this is probably common. There are going to be like parts of a product that kind of are like at the edges of two different teams' responsibilities. And if there's something that spans that, then those two teams are going to need to collaborate on it. But I think it's all kind of a matter of like how that delegation goes. And there's not necessarily like a one way it always goes kind of thing. You know, I think it depends on individual personalities, individual team capacities, how much like work they have the ability to do in a certain period of time, given other responsibilities. But usually a new thing is on like one team's plate.
We also have oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Moya saw this yesterday in one of my meetings where it was one UX designer who is the permanent UX designer for my team, but with two product managers. So we have a cross-functional feature that we're working on. So a lot of it is ideation and also sequencing. As in it's like, hey, we have a lot of these things that we'd like to do. Which one might be the lower hanging fruit that we can accomplish first? So a lot of it is just, as Chad says, who owns the feature, but also thinking through what can we get done and deliver customer value faster. So that is something that we also take in mind, is that if something is going to take more user research and we want to really spend time on it, I'll give that a more of a time frame and schedule that as a product manager out. So if you think about it in terms of like where it starts, a product manager will come in and say, hey, we have this user problem. And then talking to the UX designers and how do we want to solve it? Do we have enough user research? And then go from there. So it really is feature dependent and based on how much information you already have. But sequencing also comes heavy into it and deciding when do you actually do the designs.
Sounds great.
No, that was a very like situational, isn't like it just depends, but it all kind of just changes and you have to find a groove because you are working with people who have different styles. And I think it's been different in every single product team I've been part of as a product manager. It's just changes everywhere and it's different in GitLab as well.
That's actually probably a really good meta lesson maybe for you all through this project if you haven't figured it out already in your college career, that like product management and design is really a practice of change management and also like staying on the bull as it bucks kind of thing. Like it depends is the answer to everything ultimately, and like the more advanced in your career you get, the harder it is to give a clear answer to any question because you're going to have a million caveats in your head about it. It's all about managing ambiguity. No segue from that to this, but Dasha, it sounded like you just casually dropped that maybe you and Moya have already started doing like a PM shadow. That's really cool. I don't know if you all have like a timetable or anything, but when you consider that to be like done or wrapped up, if you guys could like share out with us how it went and stuff, I think that would probably be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moya, I'll need to invite you to a couple more. Yeah, we'll touch base after this just to kind of gather what meetings you want to attend, because some of them are very, very boring. Others I think are a little more exciting. It just depends on who else is attending. But yeah, I'll touch base with you again.
Perfect.
That's really cool. Thank you for putting that together. We don't have a ton else on the agenda. I don't want to just like keep you. But like I also want to make sure that like this is our time this week to like talk sync. So like if there's anything else you want to talk about, let's make sure we're using the time for it. But you know, otherwise if it's kind of like we're just keeping on, then you know we can break. But what do you all think? Do you have anything else you want to check in about or discuss while we're here together?
I guess something we have been discussing is like the scope of the project, because based on the interviews, you receive feedback on like, oh, like on the signing issues side, trying to make it bite-sized. And then also, um, like besides like just onboarding onto a single issue, keeping track of all the issues that you're on is like a whole nother thing. So we're wondering like how to decide what specific problem we should focus on.
Out of all the insights you've created so far, knowing that most of them are internal members, obviously, so that caveat, if you had to think about the things that you heard most often and the maybe like what do you think would have the most impact on the problem? What do you think would be most valuable to users if we were to release the feature, like a small version of the feature?
Well, I'm not,
I would say like because from what I've been hearing, it's not more so the kind of the management of all the issues and like more so kind of when you're actually looking at the issue itself. And kind of like the organization of all the information. At least like I feel like that's something that's definitely come up a lot. But I think because you mentioned it like with the caveat of this is all information from internal GitLab users. Um, where it's like I wonder how different that would be for external users too. So it's like I think that is kind of also where we're struggling in terms of like, okay, we have all this information and we could kind of go in one direction, but at the same time, there is this other chunk of information that we're missing. Um, and so we wouldn't want, I think we would all agree we wouldn't want to kind of start going somewhere without having the other piece. But also like I guess it's also maybe redefining what information like our scope of the problem, and maybe we thought we wanted to be looking at external users too, but maybe might want to change that up. I don't know. That's where my mind is right now. But
another thing we're talking about is like I feel like initially when we first like before the interviews, what we thought we were doing was like um almost like a project management tool, like something like Trello or Confluence. But I don't know, after the interviews, I don't know how much value that is given that I don't know, there's other products that people use that, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like adding on to that a little bit, I think at first we thought it was like a project management or like managing issues. So we kind of did the competitive analysis, and now that we like did the interviews and we talked like among us, we think that like the competitive analysis does not really align with the scope we want to go into. So, um, and like from the interviews we didn't find like a lot of problem with like using an external tool or like using something else to track their issues. That's like like completely different problem. So as of right now, like trying to draft like everything together in like our like research analysis as well, like how should we kind of like incorporate the competitive analysis and like the interviews and everything, even though it doesn't really align with our scope, or even though we're not sure yet which direction kind of we want our scope to go into.
I I could see how that could be an uncomfortable like feeling to have, but I also think it's a huge realization for the like, that's a huge step for the team. Because it sounds like you had an assumption of what the problem was. You did a competitive analysis around that, and then you found that that assumption, based on internal users, obviously, maybe wasn't the main problem that users were facing. And I think that's fine. Like, I think that's a good insight to come out of that with. And I think it sounds like there's a lot of like you want to be able to validate that that issue is still a problem that users face if they're not part of the GitLab team, which I think still makes sense. And you did extend your deadline so that you'll be able to meet with users. I'm still interested to see if that's a problem that they would face as well outside of GitLab. But yeah, actually, before I'd be curious, Chad, Sanjung, Joshua, what do you think what would your advice be in this situation?
I'm
Because
not
I was like, my advice from product would be just to keep it really small, right? You don't need to think about like, is this the best solution? Is this the best like way to approach the problem? You can always have this idea of like the North Star, like we're working towards this, but this is how we can alleviate this pain point. So focus on what is that user pain that you're trying to kind of alleviate. And it can be really small, right? Maybe it is just highlighting and making it visible who's the product manager on the issue and who's the engineering managers. And like usually it's like, hey, I just want to see what my PM and EM have said, or like what's the final word that they have in there. It could be a very light level of effort. So don't think of it as you need to think through this full end-to-end, what does this product look like? But do you have something that can solve the immediate problem of I have no idea what I'm looking at, and be like, all right, so now you know you're looking at this. That already solves part of the problem. So think of it as, we call it an MVC, most viable change. What are even the small tweaks you can do? Because I think that's really the beauty of UX design that I appreciate, is when it's more of like the boring solution. And we kind of have this idea at GitLab, it's like we prefer the boring solution because that's the one that's also going to make sense in everybody else's mind. So don't think of it as like you need to come up with something brand new that hasn't been thought about. Actually make a case for the boring solution if that's how you feel. Like even starting with, again, just highlighting, it's like, here's the PM, who's the EM, here's the how many people have commented, how many times. Like even doing a simple tally of who are the louder voices or more frequent voices on an issue can be an immense help. And also, I guess, from a maturity lens, we have this idea of experiment, beta, and then GA, right? So experiment is something we put out to test the waters with. Beta is something that we can say, hey, we don't, like we have a stronger sense of this and we're willing to support it. And then GA is like, yes, we're fully going to commit to this and this is going to go into our product permanently. It's a very loose interpretation of experiment beta, but think of it in those terms as well. You'll work for companies where you are allowed to experiment with some features that don't have to be a permanent part of the product. So there are features, for instance, that have stayed in experiment for like years because we haven't had a good signal to say mature them. So don't have that pressure of like this will go in the product and thousands of users will give you feedback. It can stay small and we can grow it. Not to, my caffeine is finally kicking in, but at GitLab, we have this idea of seed, then nurture. And I think that really plays into the idea of how do we start small? What questions do we ask as a follow-up? And how do we grow this into something that will be bigger? But also, it's okay if it doesn't grow into something bigger. I think the most beautiful solutions are sometimes the boring ones.
a good answer. Also, that does remind me, thank you very much to Dasha and Sanjam for joining during hours where I personally would not be able to make my brain work properly. So thank you very much for that.
It'll be tough for next week when daylight savings time hits, but I'm already starting to adjust.
Yeah, I have a weekly meeting with a colleague of ours in Australia that is going to be real messed up for the next month because they don't change time until like a month from now.
Yeah, it'll be funny, like 2 weeks, like from next week and then the week after. Like all the calendar will be clashed. So yeah, we'll have some fun. But yeah, I agree with what just Tasha mentioned, and actually that happens a lot, like in the actual UX designer's life. Like sometimes, like okay, I made an assumption like A, but after I talk to like multiple users, participants, I realize like probably this is not the right problem like they were solving for. So we need to pivot the decision, or I have to just readjust my assumption. And I think that's all okay. And that's part of the process, I believe, because we are learning from users and what they're really like feeling about like using issues or using different like CI pipelines. And probably that's the right answer is what you're keep hearing. And you can start building your own solutions, like building on top of that. So I wouldn't worry that much, but I can totally feel you because I also feel insecure when those things happen. So I totally feel you, but I think it's natural part of the process.
Yeah. I think for me, I have kind of two very separate thoughts about it. One is kind of a meta thing where I'm like, what could I have done to help you recruit faster? Because that's really the pressure on this is that like you asked for an extension because you haven't had the conversations yet. In the real world, a project doesn't really work this way. In the real world, like things overlap and like you're already in the system, you're doing your own recruiting kind of thing. Like, so that's like a little bit of like a laboratory conditions thing. But I do think it's a takeaway about this process to like figure out how we can help the students jump into doing that initial research faster because this is not the first year that there's also been like some delay and the students have just defaulted to, well, we'll talk to internal people because we can get them right away. So that's that thought. The other thought is that like I think I guess I just want to like +1 what Dasha and Sungdong are saying that like you see a lot in people who are still in school or just got out of school or at a junior level, the things in their portfolio are like, I totally redesigned this thing or I made this completely new thing from scratch. It's easy to do that. It's easy to start from nothing and make your own thing. It's harder and more boring to improve an existing thing in a meaningful way. But I think it's more valuable. It's less like glamorous, it's not like a sports car, it's like a minivan. But the minivan will get you where you're going in like a better way. So I think don't if you're worried about like, oh, we're not gonna have like, you know, like the big sexy Steve Jobs comes out on stage and unveils it kind of moment about this, don't worry about that because the only other people who care about that are your peer group. People who are like looking to hire you in the future, people who like Linda are more interested in, oh, you like really saw a smart thing to do to actually make this more usable. And it doesn't matter that it's like not a big shiny thing. You've made an appreciable improvement in its efficiency or usability or whatever. So if you're worried about like, oh, it's like not going to be like a big, mic drop kind of reveal, don't worry about that.
Another aspect that I was just thinking through, and this, I don't want to add to the scope of your project, but also think maybe through metrics, as into what would you want to measure, as into actually say like this will be successful, whether it is, hey, we actually need more external user research. I think that is fine to call out. I hope I said like, hey, not everything is perfect, but I mean, we have plenty of UX research that actually calls it out. It's like, hey, we could not get enough participants for this use case. And that to me signals something as a PM, as in like, maybe this isn't a problem that people are facing, that they're like jumping on. Because there are some other times where we recruit that is just a lot of people who want to do it. Or maybe it's just the right time, or like we're not getting the answers that we're thinking through. So I do think it's definitely okay to say, hey, we just need more research from these types of users to really solidify it. But also, what would you want to measure? In a
Mhm.
world where you can pretend that we can measure everything outside of like PII and sensitive things like people's names, ages, locations, things like that, obviously. But like, how would you want to measure it? Like, what signals would you want to say, like, we're confident in this? Again, don't want to add to the scope, but I think that'll go a long way to show how you're thinking about a problem. But that usually will be done by like the product manager and the engineering, but it's always lovely to see it from UX because it helps me orient on things that they're not sure about, whether it's button placement or even if it's like left nav over right nav, which one do we want to do? Because we can always do A/B testing. We can have two versions of it. So think through maybe even metrics as well to kind of bolster up more of the unknowns and the ambiguity.
I think it's a really good point as well. Bearing in mind things that you want to have, I don't know, like takeaways or lessons about the project in general that you want to be able to speak to at the end. You know, if you go back to like your high school physics or biology class or whatever, and think about like when you were writing a lab report, you know, like there's like this is that, right? Like your results are basically a lab report. Like you're going to talk about your methodology, you're going to talk about the process, and then like there's like the discussion, right? There's like, well, here's things that went well, here's things that didn't go well, here's our theory about why, here's where we think this could go next. Like if you think about it from that lens, you know, I think that what Linda wants is a good lab report from you, not necessarily like, oh, you like made GitLab 1,000 times better kind of thing. So just think about like paying attention to the process and learning what, you know, what you've got going on and trying to you know, go trying to go through the process with I don't know. I guess basically like the deliverable is not like the designs necessarily. You know, the deliverable is the project. If that alleviates any anxiety on your part.
Yeah, that definitely helped. Thank you so much.
But the original question here was about scope. Uh, I think Dasha's answer was really good. Like, if you try to keep it small, try to keep it like evidence based. Of like, we saw evidence that this is a good thing to fix, and like this can feed into this larger thing, and like maybe there's more to explore here for the team after this project is over. Whatever, like that is adding value.
I know that competitive analysis was kind of like something that you had to deliver for the class, and I don't think that that worked even after maybe finding out that your assumption of the problem has changed throughout. Like, I don't think that work goes, it's like, I don't think it's trashed in a way. Like, I think it will still be useful for you. Another thing you could consider doing is like a super small competitive analysis, which sometimes due to time restrictions, that's also what I do. I just like look at what other products have quickly to get ideas of what else is out there in the market right now. If let's say the scope were to be limited to just kind of like to Dasha's point, like giving some type of idea of who the engineering manager or the product manager is for that issue, like see what other products are doing in that area without having to do a super in-depth competitive analysis. That's another thing that you could do. But yeah, I just want to make sure you don't feel like the things that you did in that first analysis are like thrown out the window. I think that they will still help you.
And also like a completely separate question. But um we're doing another interview today in the morning, and they mentioned that there's like templates for creating issues. And we were wondering if that's like something that GitLab created you guys like internally, or that's something that the actual like platform has.
It's a feature in the platform, but our templates are ours internally.
Okay.
So anyone can create templates. I think that they don't exist by default. I think that when you're in a project, it's been a long time since I've seen this, but I think that when you're in a project that doesn't have any issue templates, when you create an issue, we have a little thing basically on the new issue form that calls out like, hey, you can create templates to like make this process more efficient.
Okay. So there's no like pre-made templates, but you can make your own.
Mm-hmm.
Would it help if I share one from my team to kind of show you? We have a default one that says like please read this. Here's the template and here's what it does. All right, I'll share ours. And then you can also kind of play around. We have a default and then a feature proposal template. Try to keep it small.
Are these like different based on what team you're in, or is there a general template for GitLab?
The way that they work is it's actually it's a file that's in the source code of the repository for the project. So there's a .gitlab directory that you can put, and this is a file that goes in there for that kind of templating. So I think they're unique to the project, or maybe you can also set it at the group. Well, I don't think so. There's no code for the group, so they're unique to the project, the templates.
It just so happens that our teams that work on the GitLab product all work within the same project mostly. Our other products are dedicated version of GitLab, which means that like our GitLab team manages it for our customers. They work on a separate project. So their project, their templates are probably different than ours, I'm assuming.
And then internally, we use those in a lot of different ways. So we have different projects for different stuff. So like there's a project for the UX department, and there's like a bunch of different templates there. Like there's like basically a template for the issue that we create if we're going to have PTO to like ask other people to cover our responsibilities. We have an internal project for everybody who works here that you use for access requests, and there are different templates for that issue. So they get used in a lot of different ways internally. I don't think that those are common ways that people who don't work at GitLab use GitLab issue templates. I think that pretty much they're using them in kind of the intended way, which is like either a way to make bug reports coming from people outside of your team not wacky, like follow a reasonable format, or just a way to make sure that people internally, when creating an issue, are making sure they kind of hit the important points that you want to make sure you get covered.
Also, I think an important note to make is that they are only available on the actual issue or epic when you're creating it for the first time. So you can't add a template in a comment first. I would actually something maybe I would love.
So we do have user specific user specific comment snippets.
That's right.
But that's specific to the user. It's a user preference basically. It's just a way in GitLab of making some little canned things that you can stick into a comment if you want to.
You know, chat, I actually have never used that.
I used it a little bit, and then I realized it was actually a maybe more efficient way to do it at a system-wide level on my computer, a different technology.
But that's actually kind of the point where it's like, yeah, there are no official, like the same type of template setup doesn't, you don't organically get it, or it doesn't get inherited into the actual comments. And then you saw the, hey, template for a comment, and then you're like, oh, maybe not, since it'll be maybe a little bit, or we wouldn't use it. But yeah, just keep in mind the templates, the way that these are represented are only for when you're writing up an issue or an epic. Yeah, not in like the actual response. You won't get the same drop down and be like, hey, which template do you want to use? You can leverage personal snippets, but those are not project or group based.
I'm looking at your VS Code extension project issue template right now, Dash. So you've got a checklist, and you've got some like sections you want people to fill out. And you've got some comments in there to kind of help them understand what they should be writing in there. I think that the template that Dasha shared seems quite typical of ones I've seen. I think it's a good example.
maybe something to add as context is this is our default bug template. This is not the default template for like writing up features. This is our bug template. And then at the top, there's a description. You can flip to the feature proposal and look at the feature, like what we're thinking of, what's the problem to solve, what's the proposal, and then also the labels. Very important in GitLab is labels. Which I'm sure you've heard plenty about.
Which I'm actually quite interested when you're able to talk to external people what their take is on it, because I think that I have never actually talked to an external user about their label usage, but it's like it's a known thing, by which I mean it's a thing that is assumed to be known, that our users don't use labels the way that we do. So it'd be interesting to see what their take is on that. I'm not sure it's like maybe tangential to the problem you're looking at, you know, but
I don't know if we're through with talking about the templates and stuff, but I did have a question about um like more so the gathering of information, like still being like in our initial research phase. So basically, because we were talking today where we're getting to a point with interviews where we're hearing a lot of the same information, which obviously it's like helpful in terms of like pinpointing our problem or pain points and stuff. But I'm wondering when it comes to like looking at the like I guess like research phase in general, how do you guys take navigating those interviews when you're consistently hearing the same information in terms of like, oh, maybe you want to ask different things to get new information, or do you want to more so focus on like, no, I want to still gather kind of, even if it is repetitive information, just to have, have those numbers, so to say. But yeah, what's your advice on that and kind of like when it's your point to move on when you're conducting interviews?
I mean, you know, this stage of research, you're doing some detective work, right? So uh if you're hearing a lot of the same thing, does that thing you keep hearing seem like, oh yeah, this is a really common problem, or does it seem like, oh, I keep hearing this stuff that feels irrelevant to the project? You know, like like basically like does the thing people keep saying feel like it moves you closer to an aha or further away from like no, but like we were kind of focusing on this over here. If you keep hearing the same problem that seems relevant to what you're working on, I think that it's okay to start trying to dig deeper with people when they bring it up. And I think that there may be things that you've heard from other interviews that can guide you to the questions to get deeper on that as well. You know, it's so situational that it's hard to like give an example of this kind of thing. But like if everybody's saying some version of I'm looking for what a specific person has to say in the comments, if someone starts going down that road, then you could think about the ways that other people have talked about it and the reasons other people have talked about wanting to do it in the past, and you can try to confirm whether or not this person's kind of on that same wavelength.
No, yeah, that does make sense because there would be moments where it's like I'd want to kind of do something similar to that, but then I wouldn't because I'm like, oh, I don't want to deviate them to a specific answer. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you
okay.
want to be careful about leading, right? Because just because it sounds like someone might be talking about something similar to what someone else talked about, it doesn't mean they have the same problem. So you don't want to just kind of try to go, oh, you're in this box, and then just treat them like they're in that box the whole time. You don't want to like try to lead them somewhere just because you think that's maybe where they are. But um, you know, if people are talking about the same kinds of problems, then you are starting to gain some like familiarity with that problem space. So then that may allow you to like kind of dig deeper on what their problem is.
Mhm. Okay, because I'm thinking maybe like questions phrased around like, can you tell me more about like this specific thing that maybe we didn't have in the script? Okay, sounds good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
don't feel, you know, like shackled to the script too much. The script is is a guide for you that past you thought would be a helpful way to ask the questions that will get you answers. But if you in the moment in the interview see an opportunity to get some deeper information on something that will be helpful, then like, I say go for it.
Okay, cool. Makes sense.
And I also like if I were you in the same situation, like maybe just focusing on the why, like why they're telling this. And then if you're understanding the reasoning behind more in detail, I think that's normally very helpful at the end of the research analysis like part when you're like wrapping things up. So it's just not just gathering the number, but just to understand the why. I think that's the most important part.
I also think it will be interesting for you when you have more conversations with external people. It sounds like you've kind of got an idea of kind of the shape of the common problems that you're seeing with internal users. And I think it'll be very illuminating if you talk to external people and it's totally different, or if it's the same, like the kind of the shape of those two problem areas, I think is an interesting conversation because it's hard for us, we're like fish don't know water is wet kind of thing. Like we are internal GitLab users, so it could be hard for us to separate ourselves from our own use of it and see like what like a normal person out there is using it like. So I personally will actually be very interested to see kind of what the delta is there.
No, I was gonna say like this doesn't really add anything to the like content of conversation, but I do think it's kind of like funny to think about like all the information that we've been learning is like, oh yes, it is only specific to GitLab and like how I don't know, thinking about like how GitLab works and how different it is to other companies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
nice.
some of it might be generally applicable, but you can't know until you check with those folks.
It when you do see like when you talk to external users, you'll see different workflows. I think that's probably the most surprising thing for me was when I do talk to users like in a very like, hey, show us what's your kind of daily workflow, like how do you start, and there's areas that they do not look at or do not touch. But I think going to the why, is it because they're new to GitLab? Maybe they just transitioned off of a different platform. Maybe they're still holding on to some tooling that they haven't adopted. So like, let's say maybe they're still using Jira and they're trying to get off of Jira, but you'll see a little bit of that. They're like, oh, we actually use Jira for these things, or we use a different product, but we'd like to transition to GitLab. And then maybe there you'll even identify a few things that are like, oh, these are the things that I kind of would like to see at GitLab that I don't see somewhere else. Like I've been part of interviews where we've just gone down rabbit holes as to the left nav and what are to-dos, where user was like, what are you talking about? So GitLab, obviously we work off of to-dos, and it's a very like foreign concept to me when others are like, what do you mean? And you're like, wait, you don't reply to the things you're tagged in? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And you're just like, oh, they have a completely different workflow than even what I'm used to or how I onboarded. So to Chad's point is I sometimes have to take myself out of my echo chamber and be like, oh, that's right. They're using it differently because they're also using a different tool, or they use docs for something. So you do have to not adapt your questions, but adapt your perspective and kind of have that empathy of they're not at a place where they are only using one tool.
Yeah, and actually, now that you mention it, when I joined GitLab in late 2023, many people in the UX department wanted to talk to me about using GitLab because they're like, a new internal person who hasn't learned the way we do things yet. Let's see what their like fresh take on all of it is. I think we like to do that when someone comes in because we're like, we have access to you because you're internal, but like you're not like you don't have GitLab brain yet.
And I think it's also really important to call out. So when you start maybe even stratifying your like who are the users that you're chatting with, and if you want to actually do a stratification, it is like as a product manager, I do optimize for users who are fully adoptive of the GitLab platform, but I also realize that there's users that we're trying to kind of get on board. And how do we make that transition a lot easier? So when you are looking at it, it's not like an all or nothing, as in like they'll never use GitLab unless we have this huge thing that looks exactly like something else, especially in your competitive analysis, like that you're looking at. Like GitLab obviously feels very different from other platforms. But I would say all user feedback is valid. It is though something that you should look into as to which voices would you prioritize as a UX designer. Maybe that's a hot topic, but I don't know.
No, I think you're right. The pain points and problems that our internal users face are valid pain points and problems, but they're happening in a context of user needs that are maybe not typical.
Yeah, I think all helpful information to like try to keep in mind. So thanks.
I wish there were straightforward answers, as in like, here's how we do it. And like but that's just not the case. It's just very adaptive. There's going to be multi-layered things. And I think that the beauty of like this type of research, and especially the artifacts and the outputs, I would say, is that they give us a lens into areas that we may not have thought of, or I even uncovered things that we haven't thought about. Yeah, I think it just gives me a new perspective on kind of our product as a whole. So don't think of it, it has to be completely perfect or it has to have this like complete mapping. It's okay to have a bit of like, there's a lot of ambiguity around this area and we need either more investment or more resources. And that's 100% okay to identify, because that's usually how a lot of projects do get investments. And you do need a good kind of user pain point to even start that feature development.
And to I think kind of explicitly give you a little bit of like a pep talk about it as well. This is a kind of challenging project. This is not baby steps stuff. This is like a real, like, this is a a grown up research and design project, and I think you're all doing really well at it. Linda asked me for feedback a couple of weeks ago, and the first thing I said was that, like, I think that you all are very on top of, like, whatever, like self-starting, like organizing yourself or whatever. I think that you've got a good drive for this. I mean, obviously, this is the capstone project in your college. You're not going to like sit back and slack on it. But like, I think that you've got the skills that you need and the drive that you need to do this. I think that this part, kind of towards the end of problem validation, is when everything, well, there's two different times when this happens, but this is one of the times where everything feels really diffuse and confusing and vague, and you don't know where things are going, and you feel like you're going off the rails. That happens in every project, and it's normal. It is uncomfortable. But I think you're doing a great job going through it. It'll happen again later, by the way. Later, you're going to be like, our designs are terrible. What is this? We're not solving the problem at all. What's happening here? It's okay. You come through the other side of it.
That's funny. That's like good to know, but also like not good to know, but at least we'll know.
Yeah, I mean, at least I've like, early in your career, it can be, feel like you're just like kind of like blindly walking around in like a in a room with lights off without a map kind of thing a lot of the time, process wise, and like, that's normal. That doesn't go away. You just get used to it. So I guess awareness of that is probably, maybe it's helpful, I don't know.
I think like early in my career, I had a mentor who very much leaned into like every agile principle, but we have this idea of fail fast because you can learn from it and then you can iterate, right? So as in like, hey, the sooner you find out you're on the wrong path, great, you can reorient. But I just take every failure that I've had in my career as a learning. Had to fail multiple times, probably at the same thing over and over again until it's stuck. But that is just, it's a painful process, but it's like a natural process and everybody goes through it. If anybody says otherwise, question them for sure. Yeah, I have never met anybody in their career tech or non-tech, as in like I've never failed. So you're like, no, you're going to fail completely.
Yeah, and I think that Gina's response to your question earlier, Moya, about like, oh, like we thought that like we were gonna do this kind of thing, or we did this competitive analysis, then we found out really as a match for it. And Gina was like, that's great. You learned from that. I think that's a really good example of that. And I'm glad that she called that out for you. That like, yeah, learning along the way is how you iterate.
Maybe learning was a better term than failing.
I mean,
Because that just sounds daunting. You're like,
yeah.
wait, you will not fail this class. It'll be okay. But yeah, it's just maybe learning is a better one.
That's true. Fail is maybe a strong and sensitive word in a school context. I think maybe more like yeah, correcting assumptions, or like you know, iterating, tacking towards a more accurate path. Anyway, we're just going to devolve into more and more platitudes if we keep talking. So maybe we should let you go. I'm sure you've got homework and stuff to do. Any final thought? Otherwise, we could just like.
I think we're all good.
All right. Cool. Well, share the drafts of those things with us. We'd love to see them. Love to give you some feedback on them, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.